I'm very pleased to see that there are a lot of new faces here tonight, given that we had a general meeting back in November where there were some new faces too. And back in November, the idea of the evening was just to get an introduction to what cohousing was and to get people to ask all some simple questions about what cohousing did and what our intent was. And that led to some really interesting conversations. And this is a meeting tonight is to take it one step further. The Phoenix Project, as it's now called in Inverkeithing, is at a very different stage from where we were in introducing ourselves to some new faces in November. And tonight, we're going to talk about what was originally the Vivarium Project based at Inverkeithing School, which has burnt down sadly, but like the rising from the ashes, there's an opportunity here. One or two of our members here, Tom and Carol Morton in particular, have been involved in this project for something like 10 years now. And tonight, we're going to look at this project, and I'm going to let Tom in particular explain how the project has evolved and what could be being produced from this site. And it's also an opportunity for you to hear what's going on about cohousing generally and become members of the project or become members of Cohousing Scotland. Every little bit helps. But I'm not going to waffle on too long because you're not really here to hear me, you're here to hear what's happening in Inverkeithing. And it's a very exciting project. I was out on site with Tom and Carol and others the other day, and with the support of the council, which has been forthcoming, and I'm sure Tom will tell you more about it, I think you begin to get a feel for what this project can do. So, Tom, if I can ask you to take over, I'll sit back and let you take the reins.
Great, thanks, Norrie. Let me just see if I can. I'm just going to share my screen, and if this all works. So if you can all see, can you see my presentation? I can never quite sure.
Yeah.
Thanks, Norrie. I think I'm aware we've got, as it were, a mixed audience tonight of people who know the long and somewhat torturous history of this project, and those who are new or from other co-housing projects around Scotland. So I'm going to kind of give a quick overview of the project, of the kind of backstory to date. And then look at what's currently going on with the project on site and what might happen over the next year or so. And I'll talk for sort of half an hour or so, and then we'll open it up for questions. If people have questions as we go along, do put them into the chat. I won't look at the chat myself, but Norrie and David will, and then we can use those to field some of the questions at the end and take the conversation forward, because it's very much an information sharing event tonight. So the Phoenix Project, and maybe just to say right at the start that I'm talking tonight, but very much as one of a team which is getting wider every week. We've got landscape architects of urban pioneers, Cohousing Scotland as an organisation that brings the expertise from 5 or so co-housing projects around Scotland. We've got a local nursery. We've, Fife Council have really been terrific over several years now in helping this project come forward, and the local community, many of whom are in the audience tonight, as well as the Inverkeithing Trust, the STOP group, and other third sector organisations. So I guess the project starts with this the long-serving, much-loved school at the heart of the community in Inverkeithing, which closed, I guess, a dozen or so years now, and was sold to a private developer for conversion to housing, including some social housing. But the developer couldn't find a way to profitably develop the site in that way, and ended up wanting to demolish the buildings and build a new, effectively speculative housing development on the site. And these two buildings being listed structures. And that that didn't go down well with the community or with statutory bodies like Historic Scotland, who objected to the proposal. And it was, to cut a long story short, bounced off the planning system. I think that kind of drew our attention to the strong feeling that the community had about the site. Really, if you think of it being the primary school for 100 years, that's 4 generations of people who had formative experiences at the school, as well as it being, a substantial townscape feature at the heart of the community. And, that was apparent in some of the anger that was felt in the community about what was being proposed to happen to the building. And then there was in fact 2 fires to the old school, which resulted in fairly dramatic damage to the building, which Fife Council then went in and made safe. And this was the condition of it about 5 years ago now, when that happened. Now, the second building on site, what we call the H wall, wasn't damaged by the fire, but
oh, sorry, hang on. Let's just see if I can find it.
There. But I was on site last week, and really the condition of this building has really deteriorated quite badly inside, and I'll maybe talk a little bit more about that later. So, so we got to that state really where after sort of 10 years of lack of protection and maintenance, the fire and general dereliction, and growing anger amongst the community about the state of the place, and in community surveys that were undertaken, where there was something like a 98% backing for a community-led approach to the site. And that's what we've been trying to make happen for the last 6 years or so. And I guess at the heart of that was really building off that community feeling for the site to try and build on what we call community capital and make it something that really responded to the needs of the community rather than the needs of a private developer. And I think at that time when we started working on that site, there was a kind of the start of a change of an approach about development in towns. And there was a recognition that we needed much more choice in housing generally in Scotland to meet the needs of diverse communities, that the approach of just knocking things down and banging up new buildings can't go on if we want to live within the limited resources of our planet, that green space is really important to people's physical and mental health, and that public spaces and routes need to be much more inclusive and in bringing people together. And that towns, Scotland's towns, which really had been long neglected, had a great and a thriving future because of their human scale. And Inverkeithing, very much one of those. So Fife Council came in with some funding along with the Architectural Heritage Fund and the Scottish Land Fund to fund a study for a community-led approach to the site. And I don't know what these blue marks are. Can anybody else see these blue marks on the screen?
Very sorry. So somebody is using a whiteboard facility, which I'm trying to identify.
Okay, I'll leave that with you, David, and press on. So we worked from the previous town centre charrette that had happened in Inverkeithing and the results that came out of that in terms of what the community wanted. And we held a series of participatory events working in partnership with the Inverkeithing Trust and mapping out what would make the most difference to people in the town from the site and what was possible within those constraints. And working very much from a health and a well-being perspective, looking to improve the long-term outcomes for local people and mapping across what these connections are. And you can see that there is all of the issues that face town centres are interconnected, although they're often tackled in isolation. And what we were trying to do was take a holistic approach to town centre redevelopment. And working from the developing policy and the public framework from the health community and from the architectural designs community about how we can make, particularly our town centres, more humane places to live and prosper. And there was government policy backing that in terms of housing for older people, and a lot of stuff internationally going on around the issue of co-housing. And after about a year or so, we came up with quite a long and detailed report proposing a community-led master plan for the site, and then and the key parts of that being community-led housing, play spaces, and community growing areas, and an element of the arts and other community facilities. And then COVID came along and everything ground to an abrupt halt. We were just at the stage where we were doing the final community consultation, and we simply couldn't hold that because everything stopped in its tracks, and the window for the Scottish Land Fund funding closed, and the project kind of went to bed. And then last year we had funding for Cohousing Scotland had funding to deliver a series of events around the country. There were 5 events starting in Orkney, and we held one in Inverkeithing. And that initiated renewed interest in the site. Now, the Scottish Government had been interested in co-housing for a number of years. They've had it as a policy objective since 2010, and we'd been part of a working group in the Scottish Government, along with Fife Council, advising them on how to deliver their commitment in the 2019 programme for government to deliver pilot projects. And one of those recommendations had been that the Inverkeithing project be a national pilot project. So this is the event we had last year in Inverkeithing, where we were just trying to see, was there still interest in this project, and what might it look like now? And it's funny when you look at the effect of COVID on the project. On the one hand, the project was stopped in its tracks. That pilot commitment by the Scottish Government passed by. Everybody's got worn out, and the money's got really tight, and the buildings deteriorated. But I think at the same time, the objectives behind the projects have only got stronger, and the recognition of the value of this kind of project has also grown. And this thing about people have realised the importance of home as being a thing for health and well-being, because we all spend so much time in our homes, and the damage that's caused by social isolation was also recognised. People got used to working in innovative ways and to achieve shared goals. I think us individually, public bodies, but also the third sector organisations as well. So although things got harder, it also kind of opened up new opportunities for partnership working. So last year, after that roadshow in Inverkeithing, the Scottish Government asked to meet with Fife Council to talk about the project, and they requested an updated business case. And then Fife Council Housing Department gave Cohousing Scotland a grant to produce that that business case, and that's what we're working on at the moment. So where does the project stand now? Looking, I guess several things have happened in the sort of 3 years since we wrote that previous master plan. I guess the key thing is probably that the owner has agreed to sell it to the community, and he's completely given up on his hopes for commercial development, and he's happy to sell it to us if we get into a position where we can buy it. And that was really a key hurdle that we faced 4 years ago. But the site's also deteriorated. These are just some films of when we were there last Thursday with the team. I don't think a fire damaged building has really got much worse. It's still in a pretty shocking condition. But the H block, I managed to get inside, and there's a burst pipe that must have been spewing water in there maybe for years now, and there's quite a lot of rot inside that building. So I think the H block will need to completely strip it out inside and give it a complete renewal there as well. But the other things that have happened, we've had, probably 50% inflation in the construction sector since the last time we did a costing in 2019. And the project partnership has changed. The role of the Inverkeithing Trust has slightly reduced as they've focused on the cost of living, short-term cost of living crisis support for the community. But other partners have emerged in the area. And there've been some important policy changes. Fife Housing Partnership wrote co-housing in as an objective within the strategic housing investment plan for Fife, and we've had housing to 2040, the government's 10-year strategy, which recognises the need for cooperative housing, but also the just published national planning framework kind of really embeds these issues about sustainability and health into the delivery of planning. So in a way, public policy has kind of caught up with the project, and there's a more receptive environment for this kind of project now. But I guess if there's that recognition of the value of a community-led project that focuses on community well-being and social resilience, what there isn't at the moment is clear pathways to deliver that and clear funding routes to support it. And so we're looking at this project as a pathfinder to kind of set a template that other communities might follow in Scotland, looking at bringing together a number of different community supporting activities and looking to build a cross-sector partnership to deliver it. And when we look at these challenges that we have, there's the dereliction of the site, and I guess the crises that we face, now I've kind of run out of being able to count how many crises we've got now. We've got the cost of living crisis, the climate and biodiversity emergency, the loneliness epidemic, which preceded all of these, and town centre decay, the housing crisis, an ageing population, the integration of health and social delivery, and constrained public funds and so on. All these crises, face all of Scotland's communities, and I think you can see them all in Inverkeithing, but there are particular things that come to the fore when you make an assessment of Inverkeithing that stand out and make it a good place for an exemplar project. One of these is that it's the town with the highest proportion of vacant and derelict land in Fife, and this as a prominent site that's really in a shocking condition in the town centre is a key example of that. Other is green space. Inverkeithing has a deficit of green space. The recent analysis that was done for Fife Council demonstrates that, and even that main area of green space to the north of the town is earmarked for further housing development. So I think both the amount of green space and the quality of green space is Inverkeithing as a particular deficit for. And the other area is housing. Inverkeithing has the longest waiting list for retirement housing in Fife, and these are the projections we did for the current level of retirement housing in Inverkeithing, where at the time, 2019, there were 8 people waiting for every retirement flat in Inverkeithing. And as you follow the demographic change, as you go through the century, in 20 years' time, there'll be 17 people waiting for every retirement flat. These controls aren't. And then by 2059, there'll be 26 people waiting for every retirement flat in Inverkeithing. That's if you look at the top bracket there, that's 2,500 people in the older category because of the emerging shift. And there simply isn't a strategy to provide appropriate housing for that demographic. Inverkeithing has a particular poor provision, but it's something that's affecting the whole of Scotland. And as we look at the importance of housing in terms of allowing people to stay active in their homes, it's a key issue that we need to be addressing and simply isn't being met by the private sector. And you can chart these at a national level. It's something we've been aware of for a long time. And there's other issues that kind of come along with that when we look at the demographic needs, and in a way, by trying to answer the needs of the older people in our community, it's a proxy for responding to the needs of people in other places within physical and cognitive diversity, both the very young and the very old, and people with different levels of ability. But we're also aware of the needs of other groups, such as teenagers, where there's particular things that came out of some of the work from the community officers at Fife Council. And with the closure of the high school, I think there's other stresses going to be coming into Inverkeithing as well. So this is kind of our background. The other thing that's particularly interesting about Inverkeithing is it's built on a hill, which means it's got really a chronic issue about accessibility. Everybody knows the number of staircases there are and the steepness of these slopes, but also step ramps as well, and entrances to homes that require access up flights of steps. And this person, they need to go up 2 chair lifts before they even get to their front door. So with an aging demographic, as well as other people with varying levels of mobility, simply the fact that the topography of Inverkeithing is something that is going to be of increasing importance in terms of enabling people to thrive within the town. And we did a mapping exercise that looked at the public roads and routes in Inverkeithing. And basically, from either side of the town, it's almost impossible to get to the high street on an accessible route. So simply, but the town wasn't built for the kind of population that we'll have through this century, and it needs to adapt its physical infrastructure to cope with that, as well as its housing. So, what have we designed with the project? This is so. If you take it, this is the project from 4 years ago that we're currently updating. Key aspect then is that we create accessible route through the site from Roods Road down to the High Street, so that anybody of any level of mobility can get through the site. And it's going to be essentially a car-free zone. So it's really a pedestrian route down to the High Street. This section, then you can see there's parking up on Rood Road, and the level access through to the school building, and then down through the site from there. The other thing is that we're focusing on green space, allowing nature to come back into the town. And I guess in doing this, what we're trying to do is look at what is the most benefit we can derive for the people in Inverkeithing by redeveloping the site. And so by making it car-free and creating it as a new kind of public realm, we're focusing on the diverse needs and experiences of the whole community and trying to balance out some of the needs that aren't currently being met, but also creating opportunities for people to have activities and interactions along that way. And when we think of a green space strategy, I think what we're not creating is the kind of green spaces that Inverkeithing currently has, which are essentially mown parkland. What we're looking here is to allow nature to come back in. If you think, you know, from the site's point of view, you know, 5,000 years ago, it was an area of woodland with oak and birch trees and hazel and so on. And then that was cut back, and it became an area of orchards and gardens behind the medieval town. And then it was covered in tarmac and buildings, and then became a site of dereliction. But then since then, it's been kind of abandoned by people for 10, 12 years, and nature's gradually crept back in. What we now want to do is develop that relationship, allow nature to come back into that site and get a better balance between people and nature, bringing nature right into the heart of the town in a way that it doesn't at the moment, and then promoting people to have access to that. So that's what the section shows, is that we'll gradually bring through a green landscape that's shared with people, because that's already happening. More and more you go back to the site and the trees are bursting through the tarmac, and you see that recolonisation, rewilding of the site. And the buildings then, the fire damaged building, will take that back to its masonry shell and then sit a new block of co-housing apartments within that, a 3-storey building with something like 24 to 30 units. These are, so co-housing, for those who don't know, it's a kind of intentional community where people live independent lives in their own home, but share a lot of facilities and share the managing of the development. So they're responsible for it themselves. And I think when we were looking at it 4 or 5 years ago, we were making it specifically for older people. But now I think it will be intergenerational, and that there won't be an age restriction. Although I think it's important to recognise there's a strong need of housing for older people. And with any of the co-housing developments we've seen in Scotland, there's always a strong appetite amongst the older people in our community for these sorts of housing, because there's such poor level of appropriate provision at the moment. And so there's a series of apartments with essential shared spaces. And then the other parts of the site, we will have community growing areas, and there will be areas set aside for wildlife. H block is what we're looking at the moment, and what we're working towards is that's shared between a nursery and some additional daycare provision. And we're working with a local nursery who's primarily an outdoor nursery. So we would use the landscape as area that mostly they spend their time in, but with some core facilities within the building are shared with older people. So that's a quick run through of the project. I think in terms of timing, we're working quite hard on this at the moment. You know, it is quite challenging. You know, it's very easy to come up with a great idea for a project and a project vision, and you know, everybody we've ever talked with about this project thinks it's a fantastic idea, but this is very much about the art of the possible. What we're focusing on at the moment is designing something that we can actually deliver. And it's really hard at the moment, to be frank, with community-led projects. Funding's really difficult. Everybody's worn out after COVID. But I do think this project has more support than it's ever had. And I think if we can come up with a business plan that stacks up, then it's got every chance of succeeding. I think the key thing is we're trying not to replicate what a commercial development would look like, which is about short-term investment for short-term gain. This is a long-term investment in community well-being for Inverkeithing. We're looking at improving the health of people in Inverkeithing over 3 generations or so, starting with people who are preschool and nursery just now, and thinking about their health right through to old age, and making decisions in that sort of framework. And it means that, you know, when you invest in social capital rather than financial capital, you've got a different set of criteria, and you've got access to different kinds of funds. And that's what we're trying to do at the moment. There's not really a playbook for this sort of project. We're trying to write it, to be honest. But I think there's a lot of support out there. And with any luck, I think we're looking at it will take 4 or 5 years to deliver. So I'm going to stop rambling now and come back to the audience and Norrie and see.
Thanks for that, Tom. That's a long and detailed explanation, and for any of you that are here that are not familiar with co-housing, that might be quite a lot to take in at one go. However, I think Tom really explained it very well about what the project in Inverkeithing can be. It was interesting, as he touched on just at the end, about what it might be perceived to live in by those in there. And I think this is something that people need to focus on. And I say this, it's interesting, Kate brought up the question about car parking spaces. And one of the things about co-housing communities is it is intentional, and it's about the ability to share services and probably cars. In fact, many of the groups of co-housing that we presented to in the roadshows last year and in this one are looking to communities where it's not like buying a private house where everybody has their own car. And that's one of the big things. It's about dealing with isolation. It's about health and well-being, quality of life, support for each other, and how we all can contribute to addressing the issues that exist, like the climate emergency. I know we haven't gone into it in discussion just now, Tom, but you have considered this as well, as we're also looking at how can we build in a way that people can afford to live, not just affordability for energy costs, but the impact on the built environment and our health and well-being by building in the right way. As Tom said, we're not talking about building houses for profit like a developer. This is about building places where people can live for the long term, and where they can have company, they can get access to the town, grow some of their own food, have communal space, as he described. For those of you unfamiliar, on one of Tom's drawings, he showed very well guest bedrooms. For the older people amongst us, of whom there are a few, let's be honest, the majority of us may well only need to live in a 1-bedroom flat. It doesn't need to be big. It doesn't need to have a kitchen that's from a 5-bedroom house. We can have communal laundry. We could have a communal lounge and dining room, spaces where you can go, a men's shed. Some of the women were speaking, particularly women were speaking about having a place where they could do working with fabrics or ceramics. The arts and spaces to keep you occupied, small reading area, library area. And in this day and age, we're now all looking to those of us who are still working, you're looking to somewhere where you can work from home. So looking at it's a new way of looking at how we work forward into the future. And I think there's a lot of opportunity, and what a good time to do this when we've just been through COVID. And with this demand for housing for older people in Inverkeithing as well, it's a huge opportunity to do something really worthwhile. Most developers, and this includes social housing nowadays, we've only got a group of so many big builders who, most of them are developers, and they go out and they build houses, and it's all about how much profit they can make. Social housing landlords nowadays have to use those same builders because they own the land or tend to. So it's only a one-route market, and it's all about land ownership and the developers owning it. There's a lot of politics behind that. So there's a good opportunity to meet government targets, to meet their ambitions, to try, and where better than in a project like this with difficult land that's overgrown, the buildings are really badly damaged. There's a huge opportunity I see here to do something really innovative, but built around people's needs, not round about housing units and statistics. It's about how we address it. Now, there are 1 or 2 people already started to put some questions up, and I'm sure Tom's reading them avidly at the moment and going, oh yeah, I know the answer to this, and I know the answer to that. And David's probably doing it as well. But I wonder if anybody wants to give a little bit of feedback in particular and just say how they feel about what they've heard this evening. If there's people, probably somebody from Inverkeithing or from somebody from Fife who can say how who's not been involved in this before, and I'm sure there's a few here who haven't, just see if they got a good feeling for it. There's particular questions that they have about what co-housing actually is. Is there anybody willing to be brave and put their hand up and give some response to?
You can just unmute and ask the question. I see, while we're waiting, I see in some of the chat, Bella from Generations Working Together is here, and it's worth saying we have quite a wide group of supporting organisations, including Generations Working Together, Architecture and Design Scotland, Public Health Scotland, I think a very important ally in the project, and the Scottish Towns Partnerships. There's a whole series of supporting third sector organisations that kind of have been working with us as well.
That's wonderful. Really good. Anybody with a hand up or no?
So there was a question about who currently owns the site. I'm not sure if you've covered this, Tom.
So I see Kate's asking, yeah, have you purchased this land from the developer who purchased the land for 475,000? And the answer is no. So we are in discussions with the developers who own the site, and indeed, they've given us access to the site for surveys and to develop the project, and would be keen to sell it to us if we can come up with the funds. I think what we're looking at the moment is what are the sequence of steps that we need to go through to develop the project, and there's no ability and there's no point in taking ownership of the site in its current condition. It's really a liability rather than an asset at the moment. And for a group to take ownership of the site, there would need to be a clearly funded plan to bring it back into good condition. And that's what we're considering at the moment. What are the different routes whereby we can deliver this project? And, it is challenging, but I think we're working on a strategy that we hope would be successful. And if we can come up with a plan that's deliverable, then I think through this year and into next, we would work on putting in a new planning application for the project I've shown tonight or something like it, and then looking at a change of an ownership and a phase of making the site safe and viable for a series of sort of pioneer community activities while we work on the detailed design of the new project. There's a certain amount of organisational work that has to do. We may need to set up a new trust specific for the site, and there's different kind of legal and charitable models for these issues about that. It's mostly to do with the financial structuring that are the key things at the moment. But we're probably a year away from being able to purchase the site.
I think that response, Tom, actually answers Ruby's comment as well later on the last question. Ruby's asking about the concerns of the cost. Well, the trouble since COVID and Brexit, cost of building has gone up substantially, and the standard of the building has dropped substantially, as you discovered last week. And I think at this point, it really isn't practical to say what the actual cost will be. Social housing gets grant from government to support it, but at the moment there's no mechanics in Scotland to get a financial incentive to support the construction of new housing. Some might argue that it's private. It's private housing, but it's not private housing for profit. It's not your own house and nobody else. It's not going. A development like this will not make a profit like a private developer's will. It's secure housing. It's a solid investment, and it will give a quality of life back and an affordability to not just to buy into, but to maintain. That's the principle you're working to when I'm talking about building to.
I think it's important to be clear about this, because the principles involved are that co-housing is there for social as a social investment rather than a financial investment, and the gains are really about well-being and our humanity, and we want that to be accessible to people in every financial means. There's no point in having co-housing that only works for people who are affluent. It needs to be something that really supports equity within our communities and reduces the inequalities, which are such a pervasive force for ill. And so we're working on these models at the moment, but the principle is that it's a form of mutual housing or cooperative housing, where the housing development is owned by a charitable organisation, which is not for profit. And so anybody can participate in that. And the criteria is really that you want to be part of a community housing organisation. And so the sort of simplistic version of that, say you're affluent and you own your own home and you want to sell that and buy into the project, you wouldn't actually be buying an apartment in the building. You'd be buying shares in a community interest company or a legal model, which means that you don't have to be paying rent. And the money the organisation has had to borrow to build the housing development, you pay off a chunk of that with the money from your shares. And if you have no savings and you're in the social housing bracket, then you spend £1 to join the community company, and you have, everybody has one voting rights within the organisation. So it's the operating is invisible to wealth, but then you need to pay the equivalent in rent, which pays off the loan that the company has taken out to build the housing. And then the trick then is that needs to be eligible for housing benefit. And these are the kind of the structures that are not easy within the current housing framework and what we're in discussion with the authorities about. But what we want it to end up is that money isn't a barrier to participating in co-housing and benefiting from the mutual support from a cohesive community. That's the principle. And then that's held, in trust in the long term, and people can come and go, but the investment is really in social well-being rather than financial profit.
Thank you for that, Tom. That's very informative. Now we have a question. Jan, you have your hand up. Can I ask you to speak?
Actually, I haven't got a question, and I see there are some more questions coming in. I just wanted to say congratulations, because this project's been bumping along for so long, and it really seems to have reached a stage where it might actually happen. And although I don't live in Fife, I would love to see it happen, and I wish you every success. And I'm glad you've got councillors on board and everything. It's really looking good. So that's enough from me, but there are some more questions. So
thank you, Jan. Tom, I see Silke has made a comment about it might be worth clarifying what would be communal space and what private, especially around bathrooms, kitchen facilities, etc. Do you want to answer that? You want me to answer that?
So yes and no. So what we've got is a kind of template design at the moment of a series of apartments of different sizes and then a shared space. The principle behind co-housing is that its design and management is led by the community itself. And there's a slight chicken and egg situation where we don't want to bring a co-housing group together until there's a realistic prospect that the project will happen. Because we had a group that sort of self-generated 4 years ago and then have sort of dispersed through COVID. And we had that previously on other sites in Cooper and in other places. And people invest a lot of time and energy and then are disappointed. What we're trying to do is create a scheme that is viable because we know the demand is there. And then once we have an assured project, we'll bring a group together in a process that we can support and take through the stages. Because there's financial things, there's organisational things, but really we need to bring that community together. And then they, within a certain charitable framework, they need to decide what their operating processes is going to be and how they're going to run as a group. Now, there's co-housing projects across the world, and there's fairly established successful ways of bringing groups of people together to be intentional neighbours. But it's not a quick process. It's not like a commercial development where you buy a house and you don't know who your neighbours are going to be. This is really about building the social architecture of creating community, and the physical thing of building the buildings in many ways is a straightforward part. And so you can't rush that process, but I don't want to either preempt it. We've got a working model that will establish a viable project, and then you know, the reason it will take 4 years to deliver is because we have to. It's an inclusive process, and we want to involve, you know, other parts of the community voluntary sector and the community growing, and then issues about accessibility and so on as well. So I don't know if that's answered your question, but it's not written in stone what the final degree of sharing will be, and it would change over time, I think, inevitably.
I think for those unfamiliar with co-housing, I'm not sure, so I'm right in saying this, but everybody would have a flat that would have its own kitchen and bathroom and bedroom in it. You could have at least have that. And it depends what size of your family is and how many of you there are. But communal space could be things like a communal laundry. Why have 24 washing machines when 2 commercial ones might do it? We've got to consider our contribution to the planet and material costs as well. And it's been interesting having discussions. I'm involved in another group in Edinburgh at the moment and trying to work out what people actually want and how they use it. And there would be communal facilities that could be rented out. In one case in Edinburgh, and what you've demonstrated in this site, Tom, is essentially the ability to partner with other groups and meet their needs as well. You've got some space that won't be being used all the time. So what other, in the communal space, what can it be used for? Who might need it? Who in the community wants it? And I have to say thank you to Kate for her last comment here. About historic Scotland putting so much into the high street, but this is an opportunity to put something into where people can live, and they can live well and support each other and do everything that you've already described.
I think it's worth saying that we don't anticipate Historic Scotland will put money into this project. They have put quite a lot into Inverkeithing, and you know, with the damage that was done by the fire, that large structure has been delisted, as have the boundary walls. The H block is still listed, but it's so competitive going for heritage funding just now, and Inverkeithing has been blessed through its town centre regeneration, and hopefully in the future the Friary project, that we don't anticipate we will get a substantial amount from Historic Scotland to support the project. No, although of course we'll ask.
What she's saying is she would like to see them putting more something worthwhile this is producing. I mean, I know certainly in Edinburgh we're spending fortunes on roads to restrict car access as well. An absolute fortune. Right, I haven't got any pearls of wisdom running around in my head, but of all the interested bodies that are here tonight, I wonder if there's any from the have a contribution they can make to the discussion we've been having so far, or an opinion they would care to express. I can't, unfortunately, Tom, I just see
I see there's a comment here, I demand a women's shed from Kay in Edinburgh. And, you know, it's worth making the point, I think, that, you know, the housing sector is an area that hasn't really responded well to the Community Empowerment Act, and that it's quite a top-down process that communities and particularly minority groups and people with particular needs have very little influence in the kinds of housing choice that are on there, and that particularly within that, the views of women are very poorly represented. There is an event coming up, I think on Saturday, the 4th of February in Glasgow, which is both an online and a physical event specifically on women in housing, which I would encourage all the women present to consider attending and amplifying those voices. I think Bella from Generations Working Together has raised her hand.
Yeah, hi everyone. Glad to be here this evening, and have looked over this over the past few months, and I'm quite excited about what Tom and you have come up with. I just like to say that it's so innovative and forward thinking, and I personally think that you know, it opens up kind of shared spaces for younger and older people, and instead of having older people in separate places, it opens it up so that everyone can be part of something in their community. and it looks excellent, and I'm happy to be here. I just wanted to say that it just looks so innovative, and there's so many ideas of things that could happen within that space. And also a lot of people, through whatever reason, when they are in at a certain age, or even if their accessibilities, you know, their accessibility is poor, it's such a good space to have things like art, and you're talking about an amphitheatre and play spaces and lots of things that people don't have to go all over the place to find, because it's within their community on their doorstep. And it means that it adds value to our lives, but it also adds value in that we're not travelling all over the shop to get places. And as we all know, transport and accessibility is a huge issue for people, and they can't get around. And I suppose from our intergenerational aspect, it's about kind of breaking down barriers, tackling stereotypes and ageism, and bringing communities closer together. And the ethos of our work is communities should be places that are safe to grow up and grow old in. And I think this model just fits that perfectly well.
Mm-hmm. I think, you know, Bella, it's worth noting that what can be seen as innovative in Scotland is very much the normal thing in some other countries. And I guess what we're trying to do by working with groups like yours is key into what has been best practice abroad and bring that home to Scotland, and you know, selecting different things from different players and packaging it up for what suits Scotland's town centres and the conditions in Inverkeithing in particular. That doesn't mean it's straightforward to do, because innovation in planning and housing and urban development is, you know, can be a thankless task at times. But I think
I particularly like what you had to say as well about the planning group, because obviously, as you say, it'll go to the people to ask them what they think is going to work for them. And as you say, there's lots of models across the globe of different ways of setting these places up. So yeah, I just we're here and we're happy to be involved. And thank you.
Right. Now, I thought I saw Hamish from Inverkeithing want to speak. Is that correct? Can you unmute then, please?
Sorry, I've muscled in my husband's, rather than watch on two screens, we were just watching together. I was just saying, we've only fairly recently moved to the area from Larbert, and it's been interesting to see what's been going on. But you were asking earlier on about people who might know of people who'd been in something similar. Now, my aunt was in, obviously it was a different setup because she bought the place she was in, but they had quite a lot of communal space, and she moved in there just after my uncle died, and it was valuable for her for 30 years to be able to go over and have coffee mornings and meet with people and make friends and sit. They had a pond, and they would sit round the pond and leather, and they would have folk in, so we'd go in and sing or have Burns nights and things. And it was just, yeah, it was valuable. It was a different setup altogether, obviously, but the same sort of idea. It had flats and it had bungalows, but the same principle applied. It was important for her, for the company. And I think that everybody was there that I became friendly with over the years said the same. It was important for them. Most of them were on their own. There were some couples, but they valued the company. They valued the open space. They valued it because I had a lovely green area, and just, yeah, it was just important for them. And I'm just pleased that something like this might come to Inverkeithing.
I think, you know, it's about bringing humanity back into the way we plan our settlements. And, you know, we've got groups in the city of Glasgow, which is a huge conurbation, and we've got, you know, Cath up in Orkney looking at a co-housing development of 5 units. And this thing of, you know, being able to stay in the community you were brought up in through your life, and it being able to sustain you with the kind of places and houses that are provided is really important. But, you know, a couple of years ago, I was contacted by a group of parents in Aberfeldy who had children with disabilities, and they were told that in order to support them, as they had been children and their children were becoming teenagers and adults, and the parents were becoming older, in order to sustain supporting them, they would have to move to Perth or Dundee, and taking them away from the community they'd grown up in and the physical surroundings. And that's not how it should be. And we need these flexible models based on individual places that meet the needs of our communities and the diversity that it is to be human.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's good to hear somebody who's seen that firsthand, the benefits of the to live like that. And that's dealing with isolation. It's a huge problem particularly amongst older people. And a lot of this is for older people. A lot of the expressions of interest have come from older people who are on their own and don't want to be on their own. Thank you for that. Silke, would you like to speak? You had your hand up. I don't know if it's still present.
I popped it down and popped it in the chat box just because you wanted to have feedback. Now, just to say, I think it's fantastic. It's amazing. I think it's so much needed. It ticks so many co-benefits from aging to sustainability, all of these kind of things. And hopefully, I mean, if it does work out, it could produce a path for future projects all over the country, which would lower the quality of life for everybody in the country So I just wanted to say, I think it's fantastic.
Thank you. I think it's right. Getting one off the ground would just be the beginning. At the moment we are, I know I've said it before, it's a bit of a one-horse model. The developers make the money, they own the land, they control the distribution to market. And the biggest investment we make in our lives is in our homes. And rarely do we get the opportunity to actually, unless you're an individual with cash, really do get an opportunity to contribute to the design and the impact of the quality of life it's going to have on you. And that's what this is partly about. It would really be good if organizations were able to influence the government and say, you put money into social housing, but you don't create community. You cannot get housing association grant to build communal space. They only give it towards units. Now, if they were to put it towards to measure the soft bits that come out of it, the health, the well-being, the quality of the air quality, the building quality, the operational costs, they'd actually get much better value for money by return. Because the aim of co-housing is to build for the long term. It's not a quick fix, it's a long-term provision. And what you're buying into is not just a housing unit, you're buying into a whole series of all these softer touches, if you like, round and about, with the community space, the community access, having a neighbour that will look after you, but like an extended family. It's not all perfect and roses, but it's an awful lot better. Being able to grow new stuff in your garden, work in the women's shed, do whatever you can. Everybody has a voice in terms of being able to say how the place is run.
I think it's interesting, I had a meeting with Public Health Scotland last week, and they were saying, the evidence is clear on all of these things, the benefits for physical and mental health, about green space, about, interaction between generations, about the quality and lack of isolation in housing. And that's been built into the new national planning framework. And so that causality between placemaking and housing and health and well-being is well established, and it's in government policy. But there isn't a sort of financial route to support that. We still think the targets for housing are just numbers of units and get them out there as quick as we can. But we need to start thinking of investing in housing in places as being a public health intervention. But, there's lots of funding for research into drugs and so on, and lots of funding for hospitals. But we haven't yet been able to have funding for housing and green space as a public health measure. And I think, we're a step or two away from that. But that's what this project is trying to find, those routes of, everybody's stretched for cash and we all need to become more efficient. But if we are to have a national care service and preventative health medicines, these are the kinds of routes we need to be developing that can work across Scotland to make our lives healthier and reduce the burden on public health services.
Yeah, we can reduce care costs by reducing saving from isolation. If we can build a high quality building with the impact the built environment does not make your asthma worse, where there's no mold in the place, where it reduces the cost to the health service and improves the quality of your health.
And these issues about inequality as well that are so pervasive, you know, the cost of energy bills, having energy efficient housing and healthy housing is, you know, is such a human right that we need to do a lot of work on, you know, between now and 2045 with the carbon agenda. Norrie, I think it might be useful if you explained your background when you in making these statements.
The good bits and the bad bits, Tom. Yeah. For the last 20 years, I've actually worked in social housing. I worked in asset management, which is about developing housing, but it was mainly primarily working with people with needs, from people with severe autistic spectrum, autism, and healthcare provision, and with older people in the last job. I'm a builder by training, and my drives are climate emergency and sustainability. And my specialism, though, in social housing was the impact of the built environment. So the materials we use, the layout of our houses, all these things, the impact, the quality of light, the volatile organic compounds, a lot of the materials people build with. These are all important factors in determining our health and the likes. And there was a little mention earlier about wheelchair access and the likes. It's an interesting analogy. A developer builds small doors because they cost less. But we can all, if we build the envelope of the building well insulated and comfortable and warm, you don't always need so many doors. And the doors can be wider. We can all, if we're fit and healthy, go through a wider door. But if you're not fit and healthy, you can't go through a narrow door so readily, and that costs money to adapt. Why don't we build to a standard where everybody can live in it? And it's comfortable, and it's warm, and it's light, and build in materials that are healthy to live with. You can do that from scratch. At this stage in the proceedings where Tom's starting to evolve the plans and further develop the plans, should I say, from the original plans. And these are opportunities that align with this more people working from home, about dealing with loneliness. They're all desperately important things to us. And intergenerational, having young kids around when there's older people who can care for them or inspire each other and can teach them to feel valued when you're retired and you really not got a huge amount going on. That's a bonus. Everything can be a bonus here, but you'll have your own flat. And if you want a bit of peace and quiet, you go in and shut the door. I suppose I'm passionate about housing, and I think the opportunity for co-housing is to help everybody get a chance to do something that's better for them. Quality of life, everything about it's an improvement. Long way to go, I think, but this is a good time to start. Margaret, you want to say something? You need to unmute.
And that is unique to co-housing, isn't it, Norrie? There's no other housing that provides
not in the UK at the moment. Well, there's a few UK co-housing projects in England, but we haven't had the funding here. We still haven't done it in Scotland. But co-housing is available on the continent. So in Denmark and Austria and Germany, these countries are doing it. They've been doing it for a few years, and those communities, it's second nature to them. And in some places, it's something like 30–40% of the housing is co-housing, as we're describing and talking about tonight.
And there are no negative reports of co-housing projects once they're up and running.
Yeah, there will always be the odd neighbour who doesn't like the next door neighbour, won't there? But I mean, these are situations you can resolve in a co-housing community as well. That's the other thing.
And I think the attitude of local authorities is coming on board as well. You know, Margaret, I know you're in Lindsay and having, you know, quite productive discussions with your local authority, and the Health and Social Care Partnership and the group in Glasgow has had support from local authority there, and Kath certainly up in Orkney. So I think, you know, what was seen as novel, you know, 5 years ago is much more accepted as something sensible that we just need to now deliver in Scotland, because, as you say, Norrie, it's been there for 30 years in other European countries.
Yeah.
I see Mike posted the link to the Women's in Housing Conference in the chat, if anybody wants to follow that. Sorry, Margaret.
Me? I was just going to say that one of our members had said it's so obviously the way to go for people when they need to downsize. And it seems such a common sense idea. and Scotland gave the world common sense philosophy, where is it now? Sorry.
Calm down, Margaret. Right, Tom, here's a question from Robert Beaton. Can you say something about the need of diversity of scale around co-housing interventions in all sorts of communities? That's a good question.
Oh, yeah, I wonder if Robert wants to come on and just clarify what specifically he means. Do you hear, Robert?
Robert, have you unmuted there? Have you?
Yeah, I'm unmuted, but I don't have much of a voice tonight.
That's okay. We can hear
so
you.
I'm struck by two things. The fact that the community is on hold, the actual participants are on hold for the project, versus developing a model based on a real community, based on present participants. So the question was really around the scale, because with lots of developments, they'll do things that will have 200 or 100 units, but not much for 4 or 6. And if we're looking for, I think there's going to be success in small scale interventions that, say in Edinburgh, could be on the high street. But there are all sorts of small scale interventions that are in the private sector for Airbnb, but there seems to be no kind of thinking, how can we cluster a small scale co-housing for older folk or for mixed generations in a downtown area? And then, so my question isn't that developed, and I'm sorry I can't speak very well tonight.
So I think, it's a great question, and it's something we looked at, when we were looking at in the Scottish Government Working Group, that what we would need as a number of pilot projects to explore delivery in the diversity of communities you have in Scotland. And I think with a town, it's a nice scale, it's a human scale, and we're something about 25 to 35 units. The rule of thumb being that if you're less than 20, then there's the risk of lack of continuity with people coming and going, and possibly people disagreeing, and there's a risk of cohesion with less than 20 units. But the over 50, not everybody would know each other, and you couldn't get everybody in a room for a meeting. So the thinking that we heard from other countries was that the optimum is somewhere between 20 and 50, and Inverkeithing sits nicely within that. You're right, in cities you could have bigger developments, and I don't know what number Choice are looking at. I think Clachan and Glasgow are about in that range. But with our smaller island and remote Highland communities, you're at a much smaller level. So I think, Hope's a fantastic project as a pilot for an island development, looking at 5 units and how that's going to work in the long term. We need to support these as pilots and develop models that can work for all our communities, but it needs to be a flexible model, I think.
I hear what you say too about interventions. It's really interesting. I know of the high street in Edinburgh has now become so full of Airbnbs that a number of folk moved out because they didn't have any more neighbours anymore. They didn't know who the people were. It was just like living in a strange town. There was no community. It's actually destructive to communities. And I see here in Inverkeithing, it's so centrally placed, an opportunity to create something just 100 yards away almost from the high street, and you've got a station there. There's a lot. It's built in a hill, and maybe we can get some help from the planners on how we address that in terms of access. But if you went by the guidelines, you wouldn't be able to build an Inverkeithing at all because it's too steep. But there's a lot to be done here. So
see David's put into the chat about the next housing conversation, which is with a colleague from Denmark. And Denmark's interesting because it led the development of co-housing in Europe, where the government specifically developed the sector with a range of grant supports, and local authorities have got a duty to provide housing sites for co-housing at below market cost. So the situation there has kind of been primed in a deliberate strategy by central government to tackle issues about isolation in older age. But that's quite a mature sector now, and it's been there for 25 to 30 years. And the government subsidies have now withdrawn, and it's self-funding because it's such a well-established model, and there's established routes for funding, and there's not the fear and risk around innovation that we have in Scotland at the moment.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say about that, Tom, because take the Community Empowerment Act, while it came out in, was it 2015 initially or 2018, it's taking time to mature and develop. And I think even with government help, getting co-housing off the ground here, it will take time to evolve. An example is the Clachan Group in Glasgow looking to cite social housing landlords were looking to buy. And even though they're providing it as a form of social housing, as you described earlier, through a charitable route, the council were demanding double the rate that the land cost for the properties that they would have done for a social housing landlord. And that's the kind of thing that may evolve and develop from this Danish model that hopefully we're going to hear about. And on that point, because we're getting close to the end of the evening, folks, and this has been a pleasure, if you have any questions or suggestions of any conversations you'd like to have at a further meeting, this is a good time for you to enter in the chat or put your hand up and say what it might be, because we're going to have to fairly soon look for a little bit of feedback from you all and say, well, apart from asking you what you might want to discuss in future meetings or for us to bring up at another point, we'd really like to hear how you felt this evening has gone, if it's given you anything positive or if it's given you food for thought. And do please, if you want to contribute again in future, be prepared to join in online. The information is all there from Co-Housing Scotland, or if you happen to be in Edinburgh, you want it, or looking at property there, Choice, Co-Housing in Southern Scotland. There are these opportunities, and there's a lot that can be done. And we're hoping that the kind of conversation that we've had this evening is not just for a one-off, it's the start, and you will think further and develop into new conversations and help us all going forward. Well, more.
Yeah, maybe just to say to people here who are from Inverkeithing or that area that, you know, I'm happy to take emails if people want to make comments, you know, sort of not in this forum. And we are looking to develop conversations with people involved in groups around green space and mental and physical health and other activities within the community who might be interested in having some involvement in the project as well. So you can email me about that. And I think generally otherwise Co-Housing Scotland has a Facebook page which we will post updates as things progress, as well as on the website. They're the main links for conversations about this. And yes, inviting anybody is more than welcome to join and become a member of Co-Housing Scotland, which is free, although we do recommend making a donation. And somebody's asking how to join Co-Housing Scotland, and unless I'm very much mistaken, there's a link on the website where you simply click a button.
Right, we're at that point. We've only got the few minutes left to go. Does anyone have any? Oh, here we go. Bella, I quite like this. The stories people offered of their own experiences of co-housing in Norway. Yep.
Right.
This column's going up and down a bit faster, so I'm trying to jump back. Do co-housing groups need a housing association to be involved? They don't need, but housing associations do build to a higher standard than private developers generally. Because the government has pushed them to do it. They don't build to the standard, they build to the lowest, highest standard, if that makes sense. And the new legislation is coming in that I think, is it 2025, Tom, that from then on we have to build to passive house equivalent. Has that not just come through?
Yeah, for new builds, that's right. And I see a comment here from Ruby, who was one of the members of the co-housing group, or the nascent cohousing group in Inverkeithing, and when do we expect a multi-generational community to take shape in Scotland? Well, you know, there's at least 5 groups actively at different stages of delivering projects at the moment. With this one in Inverkeithing, I think, you know, we'll know within 6 months as to whether this is going to go ahead or not, I think. And, you know, it's probably 50-50, I would say, at the moment. But if it does, and with a fair wind, you know, that co-housing would be there to move into in 4 or 5 years. I think it's that sort of timescale. And so, you know, anybody who is interested in helping that be realised, do get in touch and let us know.
In parallel, Tom, Cohousing in Southern Scotland are looking at a site in Edinburgh at the moment, and like yourselves, we haven't bought it, but we're not in a position now to negotiate. And to answer Ruby's question, I think with the best will in the world, even if we were to make progress with this, I think it would be late 2025 before we could be getting near to having something complete. Maybe it'd take about 3 years, I think, to evolve. And the other point, I think, for anybody that's not quite clear about this is you take Kath's project, Hope Co-housing up in Orkney that you've already referred to, Tom, only 5 units. There's women-only groups that have been done somewhere. I think your proposal was for older. Was it originally older people only, Tom? Is that right?
Technically, originally it was that there needed to be one older person in a household. So, yeah, but I think even that we're not making that as a stipulation, because when you know, it's really interesting. There's so much really great stuff produced about designing for older people, and the reality is, older people covers a huge variety of physical and cognitive conditions and life experiences. And so it's very hard to design specifically for older people. But when you design to include that diversity of experience, you just make housing for humanity, really. So it can be suitable for people of any age. What we know is that there's a strong need for housing choices for older people in Inverkeithing. So we would expect there to be a high demand from older people, but it's not prescriptive, and we do want to foster intergenerational membership.
Good. Right. I think with regard to the timing, 1.5 hours can be quite demanding if you've hearing a lot of new stuff, and I accept that and I appreciate that. But certainly unless David, you want to say anything additional, or Tom, do you want to say more?
I think I've probably said quite enough. You know, it's been great to have this conversation and let people know where we are with this project, and we will post about the next co-housing conversation. They're every month or 2 months is how often we'll have these, and we will look to post the recording on the website in the next couple of weeks, so that people who weren't here can come and see the presentation.
And we can